on abortion, for example. I think this is one of the things that progressives don't understand. Suppose that the Supreme Court in the summer concludes that the 14th Amendment necessitates the recognition of gay marriage. And suppose that states successfully experiment with marijuana legalization to the extent that, say, Texas does it too. Whatever you might think about these questions, you will almost certainly not lose all of your sleep over them. But if you believe that abortion is murder, if you believe that it is the taking of a life, you can't give that one up. So to an extent, I don't think that we can possibly unite on all of these issues. I don't think there can be a victory, at least for maybe a century, on these issues, because people feel very, very strongly about them. And even those that will slowly fade away, or could slowly fade away, are going to be tough. So what do? As I say, I think you bring them to the local level. I mean, I don't imagine any of you who are against the legalization of some drugs care that Colorado has changed their law. It doesn't affect you. If you have a Baptist friend, you have a fundamentalist friend, they don't have to live in Brooklyn. And people in Brooklyn don't have to live near them. You can't do much about the press, but you can push back. I would say on the question of abortion, the press, I think, genuinely doesn't recognize where public opinion is on the question of abortion. Abortion is generally unpopular, and it's extremely unpopular outside of the first trimester. If you look at the polling, it's remarkable. In the first trimester, you have about 63, I think, % support for abortion. And it drops in the second trimester to 27, and in the third to 18. Now, we don't hear that, but you will, if you look for it, see the telltale signs that the pro-choice movement understands it somewhere. Look at Hillary Clinton at the moment. What does she say when she is opposing this bill going through Congress on 20-week abortion? She says women's health. She never says the word, she never talks about time, she never talks about trimesters. And the press runs with that. We're never going to change that, but you can patiently point that out. So I don't think that we can unite, and that's the whole point of the book, really. I think on most of our questions, we just have to accept that each state is going to have its own policy, and that people are generally willing to allow their neighbors to live as they see fit, as long as they don't intrude upon them.
Well, I understand that, but how do we combat? I'm talking about a strategy to combat what they throw at us, and they won't drop it.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth saying that if you look at where we're standing, or sitting right now, we're doing quite well. Now, if you were from Massachusetts, you wouldn't think that we're doing quite well. But look at the laws in Texas. There's no income tax. You have pretty good gun laws. I think they just got better. You wouldn't have those passed through the California legislature. There's a virtuous lack of regulatory interference. This is a good place to be if you're a conservative. So the question is, well, why are we worried about the press? Well, the reason we would be worried about the press is because they would affect national questions. I'm trying to get most of those national questions off the table, and then we can argue about how we can fight the press on those few that remain.
But it's also national culture. That's where the key is for the media. It's not the issues, it's the culture they're perpetrating.
Sure.
Which is contrary to the fundamentals that you discussed.
Yes, it is, absolutely. But again, I don't think it's necessarily working. I mean, it's certainly not working in those 37 states that have Republican legislatures. It's certainly not working in terms of what Barack Obama has managed to achieve outside of a short legislative window that he's then clung onto with his fingernails over the last 4 years.
On that note of emphasizing the localism and what works for us, I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be doubling, if not tripling down on Uber and Airbnb as just a cultural message. Because I feel like every day, whether it's the Daily Beast or Slate or Salon or some ridiculous rag, has some piece about how either Travis Kalanick or Airbnb is robbing the customer, the sharing economy is this great scourge, and it's so transparent. They're just catering for the cartels, the taxi union or the hoteliers or what have you. And I just think if you're a millennial on your smartphone and you just are like tend to be culturally progressive by default, how can we hammer that message that the free market way versus the regulatory way is so much better?
No, I think that's a great question, and in a sense you answered it. That's one of our ins. The reality is that we are not the people who are standing in the way of this rapid technological change. The left is. The left is on the side of the taxi commission, not Uber. And it's not just that we need to point out, and I should say we're not always good at it. We should be careful before we pat ourselves on the back too much. Florida finally relented. The Republicans in Florida finally relented, I think, yesterday. But they had been blocking a bill that would have permitted microbreweries to operate more easily. And they've been blocking it in the interest of Anheuser-Busch. That's a shocking position to take, purely from a market perspective, but it's a shocking position to take when you're trying to win young people. But we are better than they are generally, and I think that's an in, because it needs to be pointed out to young people that while the left was cool and rebellious in the 1960s, and they're now the man. I mean, they are the most puritanical, dull, controlling people in the country. Look at the progressive output on an average day. Don't listen to music, it has misogynistic lyrics. Don't smoke, it's bad for you. Don't drink, it's bad for you. Buy health insurance that you don't need. They're the man. They're your parents. It needs to be said. When Christina Hoff Sommers goes to a college campus to say something young people don't particularly like, or some young people don't particularly like, they set up safe spaces with Play-Doh and stuffed animals. And they hire someone to come in to tell them what they want to hear. Not to rebut her, not to debate her, to stand in a separate room and save them from being silenced, because I don't know how they're being silenced, they don't have to go to the lecture. These people are the squares, and the right is full of the rebels. And I think that you're right in saying younger people don't know that, but they need to be told that over and over and over again. Because as you say, it's not National Review that is trying to block Uber, it's Slate.
Just quick comment that backs up a lot of your thesis. Locally here in Austin, we've actually killed off $2 billion worth of bond initiatives in the last 2 years, and last year elected a brand new city council that still has its flaws but is light years better than the old one. And one of the really fascinating things about voters locally around here is that if you talk to them about the federal government, they will back every harebrained scheme Obama comes up with. Ditto with, Wendy Davis running for governor. But then you start getting them talking about the city or the county or the school district, and I mean, they start to sound more conservative than me. And so I just think that that's a really big data point in terms of...
Absolutely, and that's another reason why you want to return government locally, because you win. Everyone is a conservative in their own area of expertise and in their own backyard. It's fascinating if you talk to artists in New York, maybe musicians, maybe painters. They hate George Bush, they hate Republicans. They love Obama, probably even Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. But if you talk to them about music, they're conservative as hell. If you talk to them about how their local music hall should be run, they're conservative as hell. You're absolutely right.
I'm wondering if you could reconcile two things. You mentioned that kind of rejected the non-interventionist argument, that we should take a more meaningful role. At the same time, we should shift more decisions locally. But it would seem that over the course of at least the last 100 years, the increase in intervention has eroded the road to have more things go local. I'll give you two examples. Two Supreme Court cases. One is the Korematsu case, the Japanese internment case, which ripped a lot of communities. Commerce Clause cases that help expand federal government's ability to regulate interstate commerce. The Logan Steel case and things of that nature. So which were responses to interventions that we've engaged in. So it seems that more intervention eventually ripples through and makes it harder for us to move locally. Do you see a connection between those two things?
Sure, warfare is often the health of the states. Others have observed at the moment in Britain that socialism really took hold was 1945, and that was because the people who come back from war were susceptible to the movement of the apparatus that had been used to fight from abroad to home, land fit for heroes and all that. Yeah, it's a big problem, and this is going to sound like a weak answer, but it's something that has to be watched for, because you have two problems there. One is that when you intervene, and bear in mind, the notion of a strong America does not mean invading everywhere. Those are two separate points, but a strong military does lead, as you say, very often to a loss of liberty at home. But also there's no one else really who can fill that role in the world, and the consequences of Americans not being there, I think, would be deleterious. So what do? You encourage more people like you to point that out and to establish something to watch for. I think it has to go on a case-by-case basis. I think it is probably, the two cases you've mentioned, I think probably you are right in suggesting that Wickard was in, the Commerce Clause case was in some regard a reaction to the war, but I think that would have come anyway. I think that's the way the country was going. I think in some sense that was a reaction to the Depression as much as anything else. And the Japanese internment was unforgivable. But what do? You acknowledge it, and you try to fight it, because I don't think at the time many people realized that was what was going to happen. Now we do. I think I'm being asked to finish, is that right?
We can do one more question.
One more question.
I understand what you're saying, that we can't unite and right ideologically, but it seems like we need to have some kind of unity in a tactical sense. Like if you have individual counties and towns in California that are struggling with federal intervention attacking their local marijuana growers, California might try to fight back against that, but Mississippi is just going to watch it happen. Is there a way that you could encourage states that want more federalism for themselves, but find other people's use of federalism scary to kind of help each other?
Sure, I think that question is in a sense the same question as how do you convince people who generally like the central government not to? And the answer to that is that everyone has something that they're interested in. The people of Mississippi, as you suggest, may not be interested in legalizing weed, and they may therefore support the federal laws against weed, but they're pretty interested in their religious freedoms. And if we can make the case that you will win some and you will lose some to people, then we will make ground. I've been complaining about the way in which Conservatives took on the contraception mandate now for a year, but I think it's instructive. There is an obvious winning argument here. The winning argument was, you should not be forcing the little sisters of the poor to buy contraception. Now, that strikes me as being, just that sentence in and of itself strikes me as being a reasonable argument. Many people on the left will understand too. What we said, or at least what many of our radio shows said, is contraception is for sluts, which is not a winning argument. Now, what we did there is we conflated the content of the mandate with the concept of the mandate. Contraception is popular in both parties. 87% of Republicans, 90% of Democrats. Where they are absolutely split is on the question of mandates. What we really should have done is said, for example, well, what if we had a gun mandate? And you can make the same cases, by the way, using an appeal to externalities, using talk of public safety, for a gun mandate as for a contraception mandate. All you have to do is do what the left does every single time that they argue anything, is to say, well, we believe that there is a causation, not just a correlation, between the increase in firearms and concealed carry permits and the declining crime rate, and therefore it's irresponsible for people not to be armed, so we're going to force you to buy a firearm. Right? Now, I would not want to do that, much as I love guns, because I think it would be immoral to force somebody to buy a private product, because I think that it would be immoral to force somebody who doesn't want to own a firearm to have one. But if we had made the case that, look, it's about mandates, and there are many things you don't want mandated under, say, President Cruz, we might have got a little further, but we didn't. We fell into the trap. So how do we convince Mississippi? We point out what it is that they don't want done to them. There are great examples on both sides at the moment. You know, we should be doing it the other way around with weed. I wish we had outreach groups in Colorado and Washington State just pointing out that they are there by the grace of Loretta Lynch.
Thank you very much.